for-profits, not-for-profits, and government organizations. So I wanted to discuss three basic types of organizations and explore some of their characteristics. So we have for-profit organizations, which are organizations created to make a profit and benefit its own financial interest. And not-for-profit are organizations created to benefit a cause, social group, or the environment. And government are organizations created to fulfill the functions of a government and a legal jurisdiction and territory. Now, there are multiple dimensions across which these three major types of organizations will differ. And I will discuss some of these here, and you can look more. I'm getting some of these ideas here from the source, which you can check at your own time. So first is on the purpose. Now, all the organizations can differ across purpose because, they can all be the specific purposes. So sell shoes or provide entertainment and so on. But the purpose will usually be related to the type of organization itself. So for-profit organizations are ultimately interested in making money. Not-for-profit are ultimately interested in benefiting a cause or social group, and government organizations are ultimately interested in fulfilling those necessary functions or of government or providing public goods. So the funding area, of course, also differs as well. Government organizations obtain their funding mostly through taxation, but also the provision of, the charging for services, but also giving penalties for wrong acts or misbehaviors. For-profit organizations make their money from selling items, goods, or services, and not-for-profit organizations may need to raise funds via fundraising or donations, right? The audience is different across them, or largely everybody that lives with an area that has a government, they are subjected to the government operations and rules. But for profit, the audience may also be a little bit different because it's specialized for the particular items or goods or services that the business creates. So if you're a for-profit company selling hearing aids for old people or anybody who has hearing aid problems, then that's your audience. For nonprofits is a little bit more murky because they are also focused on public goods. So for example, helping the environment or helping animals. Therefore, their audience may be indirectly targeted via other people that perform those functions for either the environment or the animals or those large public goods. Leadership structures are also different across them. So usually for-profit, there is a CEO, and that may be the owner of the company as well. And there's a group of individuals who actually command actions and make decisions. In not-for-profit, we have maybe a board of directors that actually does not have a financial stake in the company. So whereas the CEO and the owners of for-profit organizations have a financial stake, maybe a board of directors or council of advisors in a not-for-profit do not actually have any financial interest in the organization, although of course they need to consider financial issues in their decision-making. And in government, we also have, of course, elected officials as part of the leadership. We may see culture, distinctions in culture. In for-profit, people are there, of course, are financially motivated, but of course, they also may be motivated for the specific products that they want to develop. In not-for-profits, there may be more of a culture of community, and kind of social good creation. Taxation is different. So not-for-profits are usually exempt from taxation because they fulfill a kind of public good. So they're considered in the United States a 501c3 3 organization, which is not the case for-profit organizations. They still have to pay taxes to the government, and the government itself does not pay tax. The government collects taxes, and the staff too. We can see some differences in the staff. In, of course, for-profit organizations, people are there largely because they are salaried employees, so they're there to make a living, to make money. But in not-for-profit, we may see people, volunteers, and maybe more of a non-paid or intern staff working there. And since we are all organization people, right, as we discussed, and we all operate under bureaucracy, how different are the behaviors of individuals inside these distinct types of organizations? And this is what I wanted to discuss with you a little bit here. I'm going to bring up some studies. These are a little bit older studies, but I think they're still respected, and they are kind of foundational. So if you're interested, you can look up the studies that have cited these studies and how this information has changed. But from the study of Goulart and Frank in 2002, they found significant differences among workers in distinct types of organizations. So for example, public sector workers were on average older than the other 2 sectors. A greater proportion of workers were female in not-for-profit settings compared to for-profit organizations. I wonder if you think that's expected or not, and how we may explain that. Age was inversely related to one's level of organizational commitment in general, so across all of them, which is kind of interesting. So the higher the age, the less commitment. Perhaps counterintuitive. Organizational commitment was highest, though, among for-profit employees, followed by not-for-profit, which may be also counterintuitive. If you're thinking that people are going to not-for-profit because they really believe in a social cause, maybe you would expect organizational commitment to be highest, but this is not what they found in this study. There's also an interesting study by Horowitz from 2005 that looks into how different types of hospitals, for-profits versus government versus not-for-profit hospitals, choose procedures, and they show them to be related to the cost profitability drive of the hospitals. And they actually do a study where they control for various relevant measures such as hospital size and location. And they're actually able to show that for-profit hospitals are the ones most likely to provide open heart surgery, which is relatively profitable, and in general provide the more profitable operations, whereas government hospitals, followed by not-for-profits, are most likely to offer psychiatric emergency care, which are relatively unprofitable. And they do tests of over 30 other services showing a similar pattern. The for-profit hospitals, they don't really provide the operations that are relatively unprofitable. And then of course, the government hospitals and the nonprofit hospitals are the ones that do that, perform that function. Organizational hierarchy. Lastly, here, I wanted to talk a little bit about organizational hierarchy. So organizations, whether government, not-for-profit, or for-profit, are usually more or less hierarchical. There is a leader on the top, and he's just a generic diagram, not for any particular organization. There are middle-level managers, and then there are lower-level workers or staff. Organizations as bureaucratic entities generally have a clear hierarchical structure that enforces processes of decision-making. And as I mentioned before, these may be more tall, what is called tall, which there are multiple levels of middle managers, or they can be more flat, which there is either 0 or maybe just 1. But either way, usually there is some kind of hierarchical structure to enforce decision-making procedures. The bucket has to stop at someone, right? And there is some interesting research here that show how actually different aspects of worker behavior are different depending on their level on the hierarchical structure. So for example, Coe and Bruch found differences across the hierarchy on how organizational commitment and organizational identity impacted turnover intention, which is the intention to leave the organization. And here we actually have a summary of the results, and I'll go over here and explain what this means. So what they find is that organizational identity strength was, the negative here means negatively related to turnover intention. And the asterisk means it's statistically significant. So we can rely on the results here to be true in other contexts, not just in this study. So the more organizational identity, the less turnover intention, which makes sense. And that also applied for all the officers, the higher level officers, the middle managers, and the lower level workers. Here, these three here. Organizational identification, though, was a little bit different. So, and that's, they kind of distinguish between organizational identification and organizational identity. So for organizational identification, it was negative for the workers, but it didn't really apply. It didn't really have any significant impact for officers or middle managers. In regards to commitment, organizational commitment was negatively associated with turnover intention for officers and middle managers, but not for workers. So for officers, especially if the higher the number, the stronger it is their association. So this one's stronger than this. So the more organizational commitment of officers and middle manager, the less turnover intention. But this kind of organizational commitment and turnover intention relationship did not actually apply to lower level workers. There's just no significant relation between these two. So the point here is that behaviors of individuals in organizations may be different depending on where they sit in the organizational structure. So those are some of the notions I wanted to talk to you today. Here's the last reference to the last paper that I covered, and I'll leave you with this one for now and see you next time.